Yeah.
All right, everybody. So for those of you who are just joining us, as I had encouraged, please make sure to introduce yourself in the chat bar and maybe share a little bit about what you're looking to get out of today. We'll definitely be having some additional participants join, and so I'll be admitting them to the room moving forward. But I would like to get started in just about a minute or so and kind of jump into today's conversation. I'm pretty open to questions throughout. There is a hand raising function that is a part of Zoom if you have or have not used Zoom before. It may be a little tricky for me to see your hand raised, so feel free to jump in when you can. And feel free to kind of interrupt if you need to, but there will definitely be time for questions at the end as well. We will also be recording today's webinar, and we will be making that available most likely on Learn's YouTube channel. And in addition to that, if you have registered on Meetup in particular, we will be giving the slide deck to those who have signed up. If you have not for some reason, there is a way to get in touch with me at the end. And that way you can just email me and I can get you the slide deck that has a bunch of resources as well, because we want to make sure that you guys have those resources moving forward. All right, so we're going to go ahead and get started. Today is Learn's first Connect sessions. And this has been kind of, I don't want to say a dream, that makes it sound really crazy, but something that I've wanted to do for a really long time is to help support not only Learn Alumni's network, but also support those in the tech industry that are either transitioning into the industry for the first time, whether it be a college grad or another bootcamp grad, or those who find themselves looking for a career change. So our hope is to do these on a pretty regular basis and bringing in a lot of guest speakers and stuff like that as a way to kind of do some lunch and learns. And so today's lunch and learn is all about job seeking during quarantine, during COVID-19. And we're going to be talking about some strategies with how to kind of go about doing that. So those of you who do not know me, because there are some very new faces on the call, which I'm excited about. My name is Bryan Banville. I'm the Career Services Manager at Learn Academy. I've been doing career coaching at Learn for a little bit over a year now, but I've also been an executive level coach and a mid-level manager coach as well for probably closer to like 8 years. I've been a corporate trainer for a long time, and so this is definitely something that I'm very passionate about. And I'm really excited to talk about some of the strategies that we're going to talk about today. In addition to that, you can always please feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn. My LinkedIn link is after linkedin.com/in/bbanville that you're seeing there, or feel free to email me with any questions or just to connect at brian@learnacademy.org. And as I always like to tell people, I am Brian with a Y, not an I, or for people at Starbucks, I'm Ryan with a B. And they still spell it wrong. So, but I give it a whirl. So today we're gonna talk about 3 different sections. First, what I want to do is I want to address kind of the current state of the job market and how it's currently being affected with coronavirus. After that, we're going to talk a little bit about the mentality that all of us going into quarantine has, what that has done for many of us or could potentially do for many of us. And then we're going to talk about one of the best strategies to continue pushing forward in your job search. And we're going to talk about a ton of strategies at the end. Now, my biggest thing that I will kind of start this conversation with is it's very easy in a time like this, where there's a lot of uncertainty, a lot of the unknown, to almost kind of sit back and say things like, oh, I think I might postpone my job search, or I think maybe there are some things that I might, stop or kind of have some assumptions. And hopefully today's webinar will get you reinvigorated and fired up to continue that job search, because it's something that I think we'll talk about some reasons why on today's webinar, but I think is a really, really important thing to push forward. And then for all of you who are on the call, if for some reason you are looking for non-technical positions, a lot of these strategies are going to work for you as well. But a lot of them we'll be talking about in the context of the tech industry in particular, because Learn Academy is a full stack web developer bootcamp, which is San Diego's longest running boot camp. And so we teach people how to become web developers, which is really exciting. So that's where a lot of the focus will be today. So to get started, let's talk a little bit about job searching during COVID-19 and what the current state of the job market is. Now, as we get started with this, it's important to know that some of the stuff that you're going to see in this presentation is not meant to continue a spiral of negativity or potential things of like dire circumstance. But for those of you who do know me, so the alumni that are on, and for those who may not know me, I'm a very transparent person. And that's super important for me to be upfront and direct as opposed to sugarcoating what the situation is. So that's why sometimes we're going to share some specific statistics. So let's look at what the current situation is. This is as of April 2nd. So this is the information that comes from the US Department of Labor as of yesterday. Currently, there is an estimation that 1.42 million is the number of possible at-risk jobs in the US's 100 largest cities. And we're going to talk about where those jobs come from, what industries those jobs come from in just a second. In addition to that, as of yesterday, yesterday morning, April 2nd, 6.6 million plus is the number of people who have filed for unemployment as a result of COVID-19. This is the largest filings for unemployment that has ever been seen here in the United States, and they have also opened up a lot of different avenues of who can file for unemployment, which is why some of those numbers are in fact up. So contract workers, independent, self-employed workers, a lot of those types of people can start to get certain types of benefits, which is also why you are seeing an additional amount of people filing for unemployment. But I think that number is pretty staggering and is something that's important for our conversation today. Now, this last number is relatively small. So 1.3% is the unemployment rate of the tech industry as of May 2019, which based off of the US Department of Labor, they discovered that this was the lowest it has been in the last 19 years. Now, the biggest thing to remember about the tech industry, or if it's something that you're not aware of, the tech industry has consistently over the last 19 years, so almost the last 2 decades, has had a substantially lower unemployment rate when compared to the national unemployment rate. So as an industry, the tech industry has always consistently had a lower unemployment rate than other industries that kind of make up the national average. We are continuing to see that trend as a result of COVID-19 as well, which we'll talk about in just a second. Now, that first number, the 1.42 million, these are the industries that are most vulnerable to a COVID-19 recession or those are the at-risk jobs. So what you're seeing is things like accommodation and food services with almost 11.7 million workers. Transportation and warehousing is another large one. Administrative services and waste management is another big sector. And then you have the sectors like arts, entertainment, and recreation, which is another career sector that I'm a part of, and we are seeing a ton of impact with the arts and entertainment. And then the next one is mining, oil, and gas. These are the 5 industries that currently, through a research study done by Smart Asset in the last month, through some surveying, has seen will be the most impacted by COVID-19. And whether or not COVID-19 leads to a recession, if it does lead to a recession, that these industries in particular are at the most dire or most vulnerable of the industries. Now, the good news is that the information and tech industries are seeing very minimal changes. So right now they're estimating that the unemployment rate will probably hover in the tech industry anywhere between 2.5 and about 7%, where the national average could increase to over 12 to 15%. So we are still seeing a possibility of the tech industry seeing some semblance of unemployment, but what we are seeing is that it is still substantially lower than all of the other industries. The reason that this is important is to know that for those of alumni with us and those who have also chosen a career pathway into tech, that even with everything going on, this industry is the one that can hopefully maintain through COVID-19 and this entire process of shelter in place and those types of things as well. Now, the biggest impact that COVID-19 is currently having on the tech industry are mostly high-tech companies. And those are those types of companies that also may have a software component, but mostly deal with a hardware component of some kind, or their clientele are mostly in those at-risk industries that were just shared in the previous slide. So the reasons that this is happening are things like supply chain issues. So a great example is Apple. Apple's doing very, very well right now, but when everyone was put on shelter in place, particularly here in the United States and in California, Apple, as well as Microsoft, and as well as Google Chromebooks as well, saw a massive increase in demand for laptops, desktops, and a lot of other hardware technologies that their constituents or their employees would be utilizing. There's a really interesting anecdote of a company who had about 1,600 employees. They were an on-site based company and realized that by pushing everyone there, everyone was using desktops and they weren't able to move those desktops. So they put in an order for 1,600 Mac laptops through Apple. Now, Apple, as I had mentioned, is currently being able to maintain that, but what we're going to be seeing in the future, depending on how long this goes on, is that they will start to run into things like supply chain issues based off of where things are manufactured, especially if any of the parts that go into their laptops are manufactured in, say, China. With a lot of those manufacturing plants being shut down, there are going to be substantial impacts to those high-tech companies. However, the important thing to know about those high-tech companies is that as long as they have a diversified product or service that they offer, they'll be able to kind of move forward with that. One thing that Apple is doing is for all of their geniuses and those who work in the stores, they're currently still all being paid in full for their hourly work. Even though the stores are shut down at this time. And so that's something that some of those high-tech companies are really working towards. And again, you're also seeing, because a lot of those companies are dealing with clients that maybe are in those at-risk industries, they are seeing some of their clients either pull their work completely or postpone their work, which is causing a little bit of a concern. Now, for those alumni that have been with us, the tech companies here in San Diego that have had very unexpected layoffs or shifts, not as a result of COVID-19, but prior to this, it mostly has been because a large client of theirs has all of a sudden is unable to actually work with them. Or has pulled their work or stuff like that. So we are seeing some of that impact here in San Diego already, even though it's on the smaller end, but that's also one of the reasons that the tech industry will be impacted, is because of the client work. Now, on the reverse, software-based companies, so software that's, especially for the examples that are being used often right now, are software that supports the ability to work remotely, are seeing a massive increase in demand. That includes companies like Zoom, Slack, whose job postings have increased by about 25% in the last 3 weeks, because they need to hire on additional people just to kind of deal with the increase in demand for their platforms and for their software. And so specifically, software companies that are software as a service, and the clientele that they have is not necessarily directly impacted by COVID-19, are the companies that are seeing a giant, massive uptick in actual job postings. In addition to that, there's a lot of smaller based companies, even in the startup phases, that also function in that same kind of regard. And then the other thing we're seeing is agencies in particular. So for those of you who know companies like Notch 8 or Zeal or MindGroove that we've worked with in the past, they are seeing a massive increase in companies reaching out to them for project-based work, mainly because they don't feel like their internal teams can support it anymore. So they're reaching out to agencies. So agencies in particular are seeing a giant increase in project work being taken on, which eventually will lead to the need for hiring. Now, a recent study that was done for overall impact to the tech industry, they are looking at the very minimum, or I guess kind of the maximum, if we do go into a recession, that software companies in particular that are within the tech industries will most likely just see 0% growth. Although this is unlikely, this is kind of the outcome that is potential to happen. But more likely what they're seeing is that at its worst, it will probably drop to about 2.4% growth, when typically these companies were on track to do anywhere from 20 to 25% growth in this year. A lot will tell us where we stand at the end of Q2. So that's the other challenge with knowing the true impact this is going to have on, say, the tech industry, is that we just don't have enough data yet. So we have roughly, here in California, we've been in shelter in place for about 3 weeks, or a little less than 3 weeks. Some companies have done it sooner. So that's something to take into consideration. We really only have about 3 weeks of data that's allowing us to fully understand the impact. But at the end of Q2 specifically, we'll be able to know whether or not collectively, if we're moving into more of a recession, or if we're going to kind of be riding the storm. And so a lot will be determined here in the next few months. Now, the great thing is that our governor here in California, Governor Newsom, came out and did share that California's response rate to COVID-19 has shown dramatic flattening of the curve, which a lot of you have heard this. So the great thing is that a lot of the stuff that has already been done has been having a true impact here in the state of California in particular. That's because a lot of Californians in particular are actually heeding the advice of the governor and actually making very large strides to decrease the amount of infection. Now, the more important thing is Governor Newsom shared just yesterday, and so things are rapidly changing. But what he did share is it's really important that in the next 2 months in particular, and basically the next quarter, we tighten things up even more in order to really flatten that curve out. Otherwise, there could be a new surge that happens, and that's something that we're trying to avoid here as a state, which will ultimately have an impact on the industry as well. So what's great is California is in a good place right now, but this is from me personally, and then all of us has learned is to continue to stay safe and continue to heed the advice of both the CDC and particularly the governor of California, and then your local as well. So the mayor of San Diego is also tightening restrictions, and so please make sure to continue that, because the sooner that this is all over, the sooner things will start to get back to normal. But as I mentioned, it's important for all of you to remember that the tech industry has consistently had lower unemployment rate than the national average, and we do see that continuing moving forward. Now, the other thing that I like to talk about too is to really understand what's happening for companies in the past 3 weeks. Especially if you've been actively on the job search, a lot of people have noticed certain things, and that starts to make us think about certain things. So it's best to understand the why. So the first thing that is happening is some companies are doing what's called a hiring freeze or layoff. Now, the layoffs and or furloughs are an attempt for companies to be able to continue to use their reserve cash that they have. Is typically why people are placed on furloughs. Layoffs is an attempt to keep their companies afloat. And this tends to be because clients are pulling out or clients are unable to pay, those types of things. We're seeing very few tech companies in particular in that category that are doing substantial layoffs or furloughs at this time. What we are seeing, though, is we are seeing a couple of companies that are choosing to go on what's called a hiring freeze. A hiring freeze means that they will continue to keep job positions open However, they can't necessarily move forward in the hiring process. If you hear back from a company that says they are on a hiring freeze, we're going to talk about how to continue to stay connected with that company, and mainly know that a hiring freeze is an attempt to weather the storm. It is not a bad sign for the company. So it doesn't necessarily make them a poor choice to potentially be employed at and continue to pursue, but it is important for you to understand the why behind why these things are happening. Now, another thing that we're starting to see is a delayed hiring process. So hiring processes definitely range depending on the company. They can be from a few weeks all the way to a few months. It just kind of depends. What we are seeing, though, is because of the recent shelter in place, we are seeing at least a 2 to 3 week delay in hiring processes. So a good anecdote is one of our alumni was interviewing the week before shelter in place and was told by a company, hey, we really like you. We want to move you on to the next round. Then shelter in place took hold. I checked in with this individual about a week and a half after that had happened, and their concern was, well, I haven't heard from them, so I guess they're probably just doing a hiring freeze. They're probably not going to hire that position because of COVID-19. And my encouragement was, I said, did you follow up with them? And the student said, I haven't. I said, I want you to follow up with them today, follow up with value, which we'll talk a little bit about in just a few minutes. But the important thing is to continue to follow up, because a lot of companies just have a delay in their hiring process. And wouldn't you know that afternoon, he got an email back from the company that said, so sorry for the delay on our end. We're really excited to bring you in for a technical interview, which will be done remotely next week. And so although he hadn't heard for about 2.5 weeks from the initial interview, even though they had given him the thumbs up that he was moving forward, by just simply following up, he was able to kind of lock back in. And that is what we're starting to see. And mostly now that 3 weeks has gone by, a lot of companies that have gone to fully remote work have started to kind of figure stuff out as a company. And because of that, their hiring practices are starting to pick back up. So the hope is that now that we're at the start of Q2 and we're in April, is that this month in particular, you should hopefully start to see hiring processes start to move forward again. And then lastly is we're seeing a lot of changes in the hiring process. Most companies have to completely go to virtual hiring now. Some companies were prepared to do that previously and had components of their hiring process that had virtual hiring, but a lot of companies didn't. A lot of them required on-site interviews for technical interviews, required on-site interviews for those final interview meetings, and have really had to figure out what that's going to look like, which is why there has also been some of those hiring freezes or hiring delays. And so as we're starting to see more and more companies figure that out, we're starting to see the hiring process again be picked up, but there are some substantial changes that are happening to the hiring process. So the important thing to remember for that is most of your interviews over the next 3, even to the next 6 months, will be 100% virtual. That'll be either phone call conferences and or video video calls. The important thing to know with a video call is it's really important that you make sure that you have things like you're well lit, that you can be seen really well, that your audio is working well. So if it's a platform that you haven't used as a video conferencing software and there's the ability to test it out ahead of time, I highly recommend doing that. Especially if it's a software that you haven't used before. Another great way to help with audio is sometimes our computer audio is not great. So utilizing your cell phone for audio, which is actually what I'm doing right now, tends to get a much clearer audio connection, and that's super important. And then in addition, when you're actually answering those questions, staring at your camera or slightly above the camera is actually pretty important because we can no longer make direct eye contact. Which is pretty tricky on a Zoom meeting. So it's really important that you're starting to adapt and change your interview process as well as the company's changing their hiring process as well. All right, now let's talk a little bit about what's happening to the mentality of the job seeker. And I'm just gonna check real quick, make sure there's no questions. All right, we're good so far. So let's talk a little bit about for those of you who don't know me, I have a background in neuroscience. So my degree is in neurobiology. I love how people learn and process information, and so I love the brain. For the alumni who are on the call, I promise you I'm not going to bore you with a bunch of technical terms about our brain, but I still like to talk about what is currently happening to the mentality of the job seeker during COVID-19. The other important thing to know too, and part of why we're hoping that this webinar re-sparks things, is that the majority of that 6.6 million plus number of people who have filed for unemployment, many of those are going to fall into the trap of these mentalities, and oftentimes are going to delay their job searches and or stop them altogether because of how it's affecting their brain. And so the hope is that by understanding how this is starting to shift how our brain is working, the goal is it's all about knowing. So once we know, we can make conscious decisions based off of this information. So the first thing is that there are two giant impacts to your mental game during quarantine, and they are as follows. The first is uncertainty. So the challenge with where we're at now is we don't really know when all of this is going to end. And so a lot of people, what happens when they have that feeling of uncertainty, there's a lot of research studies out there that show that the brain starts to create a full stress and anxiety response on a consistent basis. So imagine of like getting those dopamine hits on a regular basis from stress and anxiety is happening to a lot of people over and over and over again because there's so much uncertainty. Every time our politicians and or our community leaders come out and delay the shelter in place even further and those types of things, it breeds that uncertainty to happen over and over and over again. And what we have found with uncertainty from these studies is that our brain does something very interesting. When we have uncertainty, our brain will grab onto anything to hopefully create some sort of habituation around it. And unfortunately for a lot of people with uncertainty is where they grab onto is they grab onto potential quote unquote facts that are not actually backed in anything. And so they end up creating these habits that are related to the false information that is out there. And so it's important that when you are creating these new habits, it's about having a game plan moving forward and continuing to push forward, even when you have this feelings of uncertainty, is to reconnect back into your game plan that you have for your overall job search. And that is a critical component. Otherwise, you fall into the category of those 6.6 million plus people who are filing for unemployment, who are just not going to go on their job search at all because there's so much uncertainty. So we start bringing up questions like, well, is anyone really going to get back to me? Are people actually going to hire during this time when everything's so crazy? You know, do I even go get a part-time job? Because if the part-time jobs that are out there potentially put me at risk for contracting the disease? Do I really want to put myself in that position? So we start to kind of ask ourselves a lot of questions. When you find yourself questioning yourself a lot on this uncertainty, it's important to have something to re-ground you into how you're going to push forward. And so if that becomes your job search, it's important to have a job search plan in place, a game plan for how you're going to push forward with that. Even if it's like on the minimum scale, that's a really important thing. Now, the other thing that people are starting to see happen, obviously, is loneliness. And just so that you guys all know, this is like the depressing part of today's webinar, and I'm not trying to make it depressing, but it's something that I think is important to talk about. For many people, they are quarantined either alone or maybe after 3 weeks with a significant other or family members, you feel very much alone. Who knows? But it kind of depends on each person's situation. But what we are finding is that prior to COVID-19 happening, there were a lot of research studies out there that were talking, particularly with social media and stuff like that, that there was a stat about 60% of the US population were dealing with bouts of loneliness. And that was perpetuated by things like social media. And so there was this weird epidemic of loneliness is something that it's termed, which is very interesting to talk about. But what I think is important is to understand the reasoning behind that so we can get to kind of the meat and the potatoes of today's webinar. And so some of the impact that loneliness, stress, and anxiety can have on our overall job searches or just us as individuals is it can increase vulnerability to other stressors. can have more intense reaction to negative news or negative things that are happening. It actually reduces the emotional boost that we get when something positive happens. And some of these others as well are really important as well, especially this last one, diminish the willpower to exercise and eat healthy. These are all things that we are going to start to see for those who are unsure of how to tackle the uncertainty and loneliness. And so with that, that's what brings us to talking about the strategies for the proactive job seeker. And a way to do that is to continue to connect. For those of you who don't know Dr. Brene Brown, she's a fantastic, I don't want to put her in the self-help writer category, but she talks a lot about a lot of different things that are very empowering. And one quote that I love from her is she says, "I define connection as the energy that exists between people when they feel seen, heard, and valued, when they can give and receive without judgment, and when they derive sustenance and strength from the relationship." And so now more than ever, because there is the risk of dealing with uncertainty and loneliness, it is so important to build out what is termed a connection culture. Now, the connection culture is actually a book that was written back in 2002 by a husband and wife. And they talk about there are 3 different relational cultures that happen. There's the culture of control, there's the culture of indifference, and there's the culture of connection. The culture of control really focuses in on the people at the top controlling everything and how that culture formulates. There's also the indifference, which people don't really care. And then there's the connection culture, which is when people care about others and invest the time to develop healthy relationships and reaching out to help others in need. Now, a lot of what connection culture drives here is that people are more likely to communicate, collaborate, cooperate, and work together towards that common goal. And what's so great about this idea and concept of the connection culture is that this is the secret to pushing forward on your job search and becoming an active job seeker during COVID-19. Now more than ever, people are wanting connection. They're alone in their condos, apartments, whatever it may be. They strongly want that ability to connect to someone else, and yet they are having more and more difficulty with that. We're also seeing that happen with a lot of work cultures as well. As work culture shifts completely remote, companies are starting to try to ask those questions. How do you keep your employees as connected as they were when they saw each other on a daily basis? And there's some really cool creative solutions that are coming out of that. And a lot of those same creative solutions are important for a job seeker like yourself as well. Now, a way to help breed this connection culture, which I think is really important. So if we all decide to breed the culture of, say, indifference, which will lead to more uncertainty, more loneliness, those are those individuals that are just going to delay their job searches. They are going to postpone. They are going to have very negative attitude about whether or not employers are even hiring. They're also not going to have empathy towards the companies and what the companies may be experiencing, because oftentimes in a indifference, it's all about us. And moving towards more of a connection culture, it's about thinking about others as well. And that's an important component as you're a job seeker, primarily because what companies are dealing with on a large scale is very challenging and is something that none of these companies have dealt with before either. And some leaders are going to step up really quickly, as we've seen some of those news articles, and some leaders may flounder a little bit, but that doesn't necessarily make them poor or bad leaders. But it's important to understand that these things are happening and to be very, very empathetic towards everyone's situation, even with you being an active job seeker. So part of how to breed this connection culture is to definitely cultivate that connection mindset for yourself. Connection, they talk about connection as like this superpower for the human being that allows for us to elevate all of these different skill sets that we have. And that social network connection in particular is one of those like important human qualities that is just there for us and is so critical and important. And so creating those opportunities for connection is super, super important. And the best way to start cultivating that connection mindset is to connect with your current existing networks. And as this says, especially those who energize you. So part of, if you're feeling weird about reaching out to companies or, you know, a developer that you maybe want to ask to mentor, reach out to those who energize you and make you feel really excited to start to breed that connection mindset in yourself as we are all here on shelter in place and quarantine, because it's going to be really, really important. And the more that you can do that on a weekly basis will help to strengthen this belief in this particular mindset and help to build this mindset. Now, once your connection mindset really starts to take hold, it's going to be important that you cultivate those practices that produce what's called contentment. So this talks a little bit about more brain science, but a lot of those uncertainty type feelings or loneliness that create that anxiety is because we're focusing on those like excitatory type things. So one thing being our cell phones or the technology that we are using, we're focusing a lot on that for connection. So we're hoping and being like, oh, I'm going to text all my friends and I'm going to sit here and wait for my phone to go off. But that starts to create an excitatory neurotransmitter response with like a dopamine hit. And that can actually cause us to be more anxious and stressful versus finding those practices that produce contentment, which means something that really makes you content, feels joy, those types of things. We want to make sure that we're adding some of those things into our daily practice as well. So as a job seeker, to not just hit it so hard 10, 12 hours a day as a job seeker, it's important that you're also taking time out to do things like art, to do things like chatting with friends and family, to do things with taking some time for peace and quiet by yourself, but those things that produce the contentment, or even playing your games on your phone can sometimes be that as well. And then the last way to, or not the last, but one of the other ways to breed the connection culture is to serve others. Reaching out to help others in need definitely boosts the neurochemicals that produce positive emotions. And this is so important at this time to really flood your brain as much as possible with those positive emotions. And oftentimes that can come from serving others. So we'll talk about some strategies of how to serve others in just a few seconds as well. So now that we kind of have like some idea of how to breed the connection culture, let's talk about some important connection strategies as a job seeker moving forward. So the first one is informational interviews. So for those of you who have attended Learn, you know how much I emphasize informational interviews, but it is an opportunity for you to be in the seat of the questioner and gain knowledge and contacts from those who are already in the industry. Now, for the informational interviews should be anywhere from 15 to 20 minutes and can be in any format that works. This includes things like Zoom meetings. This can be things like phone calls, Slack exchanges, LinkedIn message exchanges, email exchanges, but it's an opportunity for you to ask someone who is currently in the industry or who's been in the industry before and to ask them about if they have any advice for someone who is about to enter into the industry. This is also a really great way to find a mentor, especially if you're interested in things like machine learning or AI. One of the things that I encourage is to, when you reach out to these individuals, to say, hey, I'm really looking to speak to someone about machine learning. I'm a new developer to San Diego, and I'm very interested in talking to someone about like what I can do now to help prepare for a career in machine learning, or I'm working on this project and I'm kind of getting stuck. Do you know of anyone that might be able to assist or answer some questions that I have? I say that it's to try to get to 4 to 5 of these per month. And again, start with those existing networks, friends, family, college alumni centers, Learn alumni, all of those types of things are really important. And because we're in this like time where people are really wanting connection, people are going to be a lot more open to having these conversations simply for the opportunity to connect. Now, this resource that's at the bottom of the slide at livecareer.com, one of their best resources is their the ultimate guide to informational interviews. So I highly encourage you go there to find information on what types of questions to ask, how to reach out, those types of things, because we don't necessarily have as much time on today's call to go too much into depth on like the format or like the specific things for an informational interview, but that resource is really great. Now, the other, sorry, I just unplugged myself. So the other thing is connection strategy number 2 is the meetup. Meetups are now starting to go virtual, which is really awesome and exciting, but also very different than an actual meetup. So people who go to networking events in person, there is kind of that opportunity by just being in the room that you may randomly talk to someone who you might want to meet. Now that they're going virtual, the content of it is going to continue to be really strong, but the actual connecting is going to be challenging. So this is where I highly recommend trying to get to at least one virtual meetup per month. And when you are on that meetup, please, please, please be an active participant. Now, what does that mean? Similar to what I had you guys do today in our chat channel, make sure to always introduce yourself in large meetups on chat and stay present on the chat channel. Make sure to respond to people as they're going through the chat. There's ability, especially on things like Zoom, that allow for you to private message chat someone that may have asked a really interesting question that you're interested into, and finding a way to connect. The other really great thing, because a lot of virtual meetups will now have like guest speakers that are going to be the main priority of the event. And so what is going to be really important for that is try to ask questions of those speakers when the Q&A happens. The reason being is this gives you an opportunity to get in front of everyone who's on the meetup, to introduce yourself, and to ask a really great question. So I would say, hey, my name is Bryan Banville. I'm a new developer to San Diego. Thank you so much for taking the time today to speak on the topic of, we'll say, I don't know, data science. And I had a question about data structures, and then kind of go into your question. But it again gives you another opportunity to be an active participant, to introduce yourself on the call. Always introduce yourself on the call, and then try to actively participate again on those chat functions. Some meetups will also have breakout sessions as well, and those are really great opportunities to try to make connections as a part of those virtual meetups. But again, please, please, please do not be a passive participant, because you want to continue to find that value out of what you would get from a normal networking event or meetup. Connection strategy number 3 is virtual skill training is a really great opportunity to continue to work on your skill sets while also making connections at the same time. So definitely keeping up your skills through project-based work is one of the best things that you can be doing during this time as a job seeker. Now, it can be challenging a little bit to do project-based work and not be able to bounce it off of people. So that's why I highly recommend trying to seek out a mentor who might be able to do a code review for you of one of your projects. In addition to that, for all Learn alumni, we have a great partner, and I'll be posting in the Learn Slack channel in particular, called mintbean.io. Those who are on the call who are not a Learn alumni can definitely go to mintbean.io to find out about their virtual hackathons that are invitation only, but it's an opportunity for junior entry-level devs to be able to participate in weekly hackathons and then be connected out to actual NGOs, nonprofit partners that are looking for some help with their tech, so that you're actually working on some pro bono work. But what's really great is you're actually working on real case scenarios that can be added to your portfolio sites and those types of things as well. And it's a really good opportunity to make strong connections across the United States and in our neighbor up in Canada as well. So definitely look out for that in the Slack channel. And in addition, I say create your own hackathons and invite others to participate. It's a great opportunity to come up with a specific thing related to COVID-19, or that could be a theme that you have for the hackathon, but get some folks together and create a hackathon on your own and invite others to participate is a great way to start building that connection and that network, which is really, really great. Now, connection strategy number 4 is all about serving others. I say reaching out to things like neighborhood businesses that may be struggling during this time and offer to assist them with any tech projects they have, or upkeep their websites or stuff like that. Again, this may be pro bono, but it provides you an opportunity to serve others, particularly neighborhood small businesses and nonprofits and NGOs. They're going to be the ones that are struggling the most during COVID-19. And so the more that you can reach out to them and serve them, that is going to benefit you in the future as well, by making these strong connections with business owners who know other business owners who may be able to hire you directly, which is really great. One idea is to create a neighborhood communication app that provides updates for your own community. So become an active member of your community as well, and really kind of open source it to support things. And then one of my favorite things to do as a great idea for like side projects is ask your friends and family the following question. If you could solve one thing with technology, what would it be? So it can sometimes be hard to come up with ideas like ideas that we have for side projects and stuff like that. But I strongly, strongly encourage that by asking this question to friends and family, you will get so many different ideas that you'll have like real, actual applications that you can be building that are supporting and serving your friends and your family, which is really, really great. And then connection strategy number 5, I strongly encourage to get creative during this time as much as you possibly can. Become a content creator. Like I said, one of the things that I'm most excited about that has come out of COVID-19 is the ability to do these webinars, which has been something that I'm super interested in doing, just maybe haven't had the amount of time. I still don't have enough time, but this whole environment has like reignited this like brainchild that I've had for a long time, and I'm getting super excited about it. So becoming a content creator that shows value with the things that you know and do well. Build a community of other job seekers and maybe create a cool project together, or kind of continue to build out that community. Particularly for Learn alumni, there's over 350 of you. And so this is a great opportunity to work as a community, to build cool projects together, to lean on each other and support each other. And then most importantly, as it says there in all caps, support others and ask for support yourself. Particularly those who are Learn alumni, you know that you can reach out to any Learn staff at any time as you guys have career services for life, and we're here to support you as much as we possibly can. And so even if you just need someone to listen, we are here for you. And that's something that's really important for anyone who's on this call, is to make sure that you are totally fine asking for support, because now is the perfect time to do it. And then a couple of last strategies during the application process that I encourage. One is be super proactive with your applications. What I mean by that is, for those of you who know the 48-hour rule, the 48-hour rule is when you find a job position that you are interested in applying for, it is so important to be proactive about that position by first trying to connect with someone at that company. That can be done through LinkedIn. That can be done by checking in with your existing network to see if others may know people who work at those companies. After you've reached out to that individual, and again, I only encourage connecting with 2 to 3 people per company, not the entire company, because then they'll think you're a little crazy. But I strongly encourage reaching out to those people, setting the timer for 48 hours. And if you haven't heard back from someone within 48 hours, go ahead and apply for that position. But the goal of this is to be proactive, to hopefully talk to someone prior to applying that can either push your application through or give you some tips and pointers on what you should be including in your application to that company. Additionally, it's so important to be putting out high quality applications at this time. That means tailoring your resume, tailoring and writing a cover letter, even if the position doesn't ask for it, to be doing those types of things that is directly related to the job. Showing value and how your skills are connecting to what the job will require is super critical and important. So making sure that says, I have this skill set and I think that's going to allow for me to add this value to your company. And so I follow the 70-30 rule with my applications, which is about 70% of your applications should be the highest quality applications you can possibly put out. And then the other 30% can be sometimes those quick, easy applies. But of course, if you can do 100% as high quality, that's the goal. But this allows for you to still get your application numbers up by using that 70-30 rule. Definitely emphasize remote working skill sets on your application materials. Even if you haven't necessarily had a lot of experience with that, talk about the ability to work remote and what that means. That's going to focus a lot on time management, a lot on communication, and problem solving as well. So these are key things that are so critical and important for you to share on your application materials, because a lot of jobs will be looking for that skill set now. Definitely follow up every 5 business days once you have submitted an application, especially if you have already heard back from them. Follow up every 5 business days and try to show as much value during those follow-ups. So by following, be like, hey, give an update on where the job posting is, give an update on this, and just kind of constantly asking questions that serve you, try to show them some value. So if there is a skill set that was required on the job description, and maybe you took a week to really dig into that and you found something really interesting, bring that to the table. You know, I was able to do this really cool side project in Python, which I know is one of your core technologies. You know, I just wanted to share that with the team. And I'm here to kind of answer any questions. Hey, I saw this really cool article about how to help small businesses during the time of COVID. I thought of your business and I wanted to forward it to you. These are really, really good things to think about. And then the last thing is, even if we see a small downturn in the amount of full-time positions that are available in Q2, I have a very strong feeling that we're going to see an uptick in contract work. And so definitely having signing up at Upwork.com, which is a great site for contract work, and having a profile there and bidding out on things, I think is really, really important. In addition, I think it's a really strong bargaining tool to have during this time, because some companies are like, we just don't feel comfortable hiring a full-time employee during this time. A nice bargaining tool you can use if that comes up in conversation is to offer potentially to do a contract role as a trial period. Would you be open to bringing on a contractor to help with some of your project work as a trial period? There's less risk to you as a company. I will get a lot of value out of experiencing the team. I'm super interested in your company. And I think that this could be a really good opportunity. And after 3 months, maybe we can reevaluate to see if a full-time offer could be something that's a reality in the future. So have that bargaining tool. It's not something to slip in right away, but it's a great thing if that comes up in conversation. And then, like I said, creating a game plan and keep moving forward. Don't fall into the same trap of the hundreds of thousands of people that are going to stop their job search altogether. I will truly, the majority of recently unemployed will not job search during the next 3 months. So it's been proven that people who go through unemployment, going through unemployment can take anywhere from 3 to 4 weeks to finalize the unemployment process. And there are even some more substantial delays now with so many people applying for it. So people take so much time just applying for unemployment. After they've applied for unemployment, especially with the recent increase in unemployment, you're going to see a lot of people that are going to say, well, this actually lets me weather the storm out, so I'm not going to actively job search until all of this is all over. So a lot of people will not be job searching in the next 3 months, which leaves a ton of job postings available. I've had companies reach out to me to say, hey, Bryan, I just wanted to remind you that we are still actively pursuing candidates. We've seen a downturn in the amount of applications we're getting, and so we want to reach out to places like Learn that has some really great talent. We are looking for talent. So if you can send people our way, that would be greatly appreciated. So a lot of companies are struggling with this fact as well, that some people are going to choose to not job search. Cool. This is a credit slide. This slide deck was created using an awesome template on Slides Carnival with a lot of the photographs coming from Unsplash. Again, my name's Bryan Banville. Here's my contact information, and here's a link to Learn Academy if you're interested in finding out more. But let's open it up to questions. Does anyone have any questions of anything that I covered today? And you can feel free to just jump off of mute if you would like.
Yeah, do you think that some of the some of the companies that you said are the hiring is surging, you know, like Slack and Zoom and stuff? You think after this is all over, they'll get rid of a bunch of people?
That's a great question. So what we are starting to see, and what's interesting, and what was your name?
Jesse.
Jesse. Thanks for the question, Jesse. So Jesse, what's interesting, and this kind of goes back to the uncertainty conversation, is we're not 100% sure exactly how companies are going to react to this. There's the potential that a lot of companies will realize that remote work is actually a possibility, and may be more flexible in for their employees of how they work moving forward, which means that things like Zoom, Slack will continue to have that increased high demand that it's having right now. On the flip side, yes, there's a lot of companies that could return, but I think the hope right now for places like Zoom and for places like Slack in particular is they are working in overdrive. So I've actually also seen an uptick in job postings for like customer success people as well, which is like to help support onboarding clients, mainly because they want to make sure that if they're going to use this technology now, that it sticks for the workplace as well. So I have a feeling that you're going to see, there might be like a flat line of jobs at Slack, but I don't necessarily think they're going to be getting rid of a ton of people. What to look for, Jesse, though, is on a job description. There are some job descriptions out there right now that do in parentheses say temporary. And that is a great question to ask during the recruitment process. You know, I wanted to see, is this a role that you see being with the company long-term, or is this currently temporary during COVID-19? Great question, though. Any other questions? I saw a few other people unmuting when Jesse asked the question, so feel free to raise your hand or ask the question.
Okay, I actually have one question. I did type in that I did not, but I came up with a question. So my name is Gabby. I have a question in regards to, do you think when there are applications requesting some sort of a, hey, put your portfolio, and they ask in another tab for you to paste your GitHub link, is that actually
Sure.
something that companies have been looking into? They actually want you to kind of have some sort of a portfolio or work on JavaScript, Python into your GitHub account if you have one? Because I created one last month. I don't want to load
Okay.
so much, and I wonder if I should. They're like, what is your recommendation?
Yeah, that's a great question, Gabby. So my encouragement is GitHub is actually one of the first places that a lot of recruiters and hiring managers will go to look for someone who's applying for development. So if it's something that you've just created, I definitely recommend trying to add some projects in there. Even if it's projects that you've built on a different platform and don't necessarily have the Git flow that you can put in there, if it's something that you can load in, I think great. If not, definitely having at least a README file in GitHub that describes the projects and link out to your portfolio site. But I do strongly encourage, like I think your question, Gabby, too, is also like portfolio versus GitHub, which is more important. For me, I think that GitHub is more important to be able to show your actual code base, as opposed to portfolio sites, which tend to just link out to things like your GitHub. So even on your portfolio in your project section, I would have maybe like a description of the project, the technologies that you use to build it. But in addition, I would have, if you have a live demo of it, a link to a live demo if you're hosting it somewhere, or at least a link to your GitHub repository or a repository of the code that you built, so that they can look through your code base. But I would say, yes, that's definitely something that a lot of companies are very interested in. And if you don't have an active GitHub, it's very possible that you get put into the pile of like, well, we'll look at their application later because they don't have an active GitHub. So having those side projects, working on those things during this time is really important and critical, because that's definitely somewhere that recruiters and people are going to look as well.
Can I say something else? As someone who has recently been on the other side of this, well, having GitHub is very useful to help see how someone codes. Having your projects actually actively hosted so they can poke around and see what the end result is a lot more helpful, since on the interviewer side, we don't necessarily have a lot of time to pull down all your repositories to see how they work, especially if they don't have good readmes and stuff.
Yeah, that's a great addition, Danny. And something that Danny is touching in on too, that a lot of recruiters will talk to you about, is if you're sending over projects to a company that don't work, that's also a really bad thing. So make sure that your actual versions of or hosted demos that you have are actually functioning, and that they're not getting a bunch of error messages, or they're not actually able to utilize it, because then they won't even go into your code base if it can't work. So thanks for the contribution, Danny. That's great. All right.
you.
Any other questions? Yeah. All right. Well, if there are no more questions, as we said, we're going to be. Oh, yeah.
Sorry.
Go ahead.
No, I think was Carl or Jesse trying to say something. Sorry, now my dog's barking. Sorry.
Oh, Carl, did you have a question?
I just don't think his audio might not be working.
Oh, okay. Carl,
Sorry.
if you have a question, yeah, go ahead. We're still unable to hear you, Carl. So if you want to put your question into the chat function, I can see the chat function right now. Thanks for catching that, Hillary. While Carl is typing that, just for those of you, a reminder that we're going to try to make this presentation available, so that the active links that are in here, you guys can kind of click through those as well. And so if for some reason you did not sign in through the meetup, feel free to email me at brian@learnacademy.org, and I'll be able to send you the PDF of the presentation. And we'll also be posting this recording probably to our YouTube channels as well. All right, Carl, I got your question. Oh, that's a great question. So Carl's question, everyone, is he is wondering if companies cared about GitHub commit history streaks, like the green squares that show up, how often you commit to GitHub. So yes, so Carl, when I'm talking about an active GitHub, that means that you have a strong history of commits, or those nice little green squares. And more importantly, it's important to also diversify what those commits look like. So if you're just constantly refactoring things to get those green boxes, a very smart, astute hiring manager is going to notice that and say, oh, well, they just keep refactoring the same thing over and over and over again in order to get the commits. So you do want to make sure to diversify those commits. It's not something that's required of you on a daily basis, but I would say having weekly commits is super important. So carving out some time that, especially like, treat yourself like a developer right now. Give yourself like a task that you're going to complete by a certain time that week, and then push that commit in your GitHub, just like you would to anyone else. And that's where also, if you can identify a mentor that can do a code review with you, there's that added accountability for, oh, I have to get this done and committed so that my mentor can do my code review. But definitely having at least a weekly commit base is important. If they go and they see that you've had like a month or longer of like non-commit recently, that's when recruiters and hiring managers start to question if you're actually an active candidate. Now, what I recommend for people, especially those who maybe had a job and maybe find themselves on the job search now, or maybe were working for a company, say in an internship, and like had a month of inactivity in their personal accounts, I always say create one commit that is recent, that at least has a README file that talks about what you were doing during that time. That's a really great way, just like on your resume, how you would explain a time gap. It's the same type of thing on a GitHub. Create a README file and say, hey, I was interning for this really cool company and had signed an NDA, so was unable to use any of the project work that I was doing for that company in my actual personal GitHub account, but here's a description of the project that I work with, the technology I work with, some of the solutions that we came up with. Those are some great ways to showcase the work you did for a company without being able to show the code base because of a non-disclosure agreement, or just kind of unable to have access to the company code, if that makes sense. Cool. Any other questions? You're welcome. All right. So it looks like we are good. As I said, we're going to try to host these on a pretty regular basis. I think in the future, we're hoping for weekly, but as of right now, as we get them up and running, it may be every few weeks. But we definitely have some really cool guest speakers that are already lined up. And so one of the talks that's coming up is with a community partner of ours called Koji, which is a really great app that you can build web-based games and create templates from. It's a really good way to get into some legacy code, really understand the architecture and structure of how things are built. And then you can also submit templates for games yourself that can get added to the network. And so it's a really good opportunity to continue to build connection with developers all across the country. So stay tuned for that, and we'll hopefully have a list of some additional guest speakers coming up soon. But thank you to everyone who tuned in today, and for those who are tuning into the recording. Again, my name is Bryan Banville. You can reach out to me at brian@learnacademy.org, or feel free to check out learnacademy.org and look us up for any additional questions that you may have. And I know it's cheesy, but we definitely are all in this together. And so the more that we can support each other during COVID-19 and beyond, the more value that we are all going to get as a tech community, which is something that's very near and dear to Learn Academy's heart. So thank you all so much. Have a great rest of your day, and have an awesome weekend. Bye, everybody.